The ice storm hit Oak Ridge, Illinois on a Tuesday morning in January, and by noon, my 68-year-old neighbor Mrs. Patterson was lying on her driveway with a broken hip. I watched from my kitchen window as the ambulance carefully navigated the frozen street, paramedics slipping and sliding as they loaded her onto a stretcher. That was when I knew the HOA's new policy was going to become a serious problem. My name is Marcus Yates, and I had lived in the Meadowbrook Estates subdivision for 5 years. It was one of those sprawling planned communities northwest of Chicago, full of cookie-cutter colonials and strict rules about everything from mailbox colors to lawn heights. The homeowner association had always been particular, but things had gotten worse 6 months ago when Patricia Hendricks took over as president. Patricia was exactly what you would picture when someone said the word Karen. Blonde highlights, designer athleisure wear, oversized sunglasses permanently perched on her head, and an expression that suggested she was perpetually searching for a manager to speak to. She had made it her personal mission to transform Meadowbrook Estates into what she called an environmentally conscious, aesthetically pristine community. What that actually meant was a never-ending stream of new rules and regulations. The salt ban had come in September, announced in a tersely worded letter that appeared in everyone's mailbox. The reasoning, according to Patricia, was threefold. First, salt damaged concrete driveways and reduced property values. Second, it harmed the carefully maintained landscaping when it washed into the grass. Third, and most importantly to Patricia, it was terrible for the environment, contaminating groundwater and killing vegetation. The letter had outlined approved alternatives: sand, kitty litter, or a specific brand of eco-friendly ice melt that cost about 3 times as much as regular salt, and according to the reviews I had looked up, worked about half as well. Violations would result in fines starting at $250 for the first offense, doubling with each subsequent violation. I had stood in my driveway that September afternoon, reading the letter and feeling my blood pressure rise. My wife Sarah had passed away from cancer 2 years earlier, and I had been trying to rebuild my life one day at a time. The last thing I needed was Patricia Hendricks dictating how I managed my own property. "This is insane," my neighbor Tom Morrison had said, walking over with his own copy of the letter. Tom was a corporate attorney, mid-40s, with the kind of sharp mind that made you glad when he was on your side. "They cannot enforce this. Salt is a basic safety measure." "You want to be the one to tell Patricia that," I had replied. Tom had grinned. "Not particularly, but if she pushes this, she is going to have problems." Most people had grumbled but complied. The eco-friendly ice melt had appeared in garages across the neighborhood. A few residents tried the sand and kitty litter approach, but everyone knew it was inadequate. Illinois winters were not kind, and Meadowbrook Estates sat on a slight elevation that made the streets treacherous when ice formed. Then came that Tuesday in January. The ice storm had been forecast for days, and I had prepared as best I could. I had a bag of the approved ice melt in my garage, along with a backup supply of regular rock salt I had hidden behind some boxes. If things got bad enough, I was not going to let some HOA rule prevent me from keeping my driveway safe. By morning, everything was coated in a thick layer of ice. The temperature had dropped to 15 degrees, and the approved ice melt was essentially useless. I had spread it according to the instructions, and it had barely made a dent. My driveway remained a skating rink. That was when Mrs. Patterson had decided to get her mail. I had been drinking coffee and staring out the window, watching the ice glisten in the weak winter sunlight, when I saw her emerge from her house. She was moving carefully, taking tiny shuffling steps, but her driveway was sheet ice. The approved ice melt had failed there too. What happened next seemed to occur in slow motion. Her foot slipped, her arms windmilled, and then she was down, hard, and the sound of her cry of pain carried even through my closed windows. I was outside in seconds, not even bothering with a coat. Other neighbors were emerging too. Mrs. Patterson was conscious but clearly in agony, her face white with shock. "Do not move," I told her, kneeling beside her despite the ice. "Someone call 911. My hip," she gasped. "Oh God, my hip." Tom Morrison was there too, phone already to his ear, giving the dispatcher our address. His wife Linda brought blankets. We did what we could to keep Mrs. Patterson warm and still until the ambulance arrived. As the paramedics worked, I saw Patricia Hendricks standing on her own porch 3 houses down. She was watching, arms crossed, but made no move to come help or even check if Mrs. Patterson was okay. Something about her posture struck me as defensive, almost guilty. The ambulance finally left and the neighborhood slowly dispersed back into warm houses. Tom caught my arm before I could go inside. "This is on the HOA," he said quietly. "Mrs. Patterson could have prevented this if she had been able to use proper salt." "What are you thinking?" I asked. "I am thinking Patricia Hendricks just created a massive liability issue, and I am thinking Mrs. Patterson would have grounds for a lawsuit." I looked at my own driveway, still dangerously icy despite my best efforts with the approved products. "You really think she would sue?" "I think she should, and I think she will not be alone." Tom glanced around at the frozen subdivision. "Look at this place, Marcus. It is a disaster waiting to happen. Someone needs to hold the HOA accountable before more people get hurt." He was right, of course. By evening, 2 more people had fallen. The Schneider kid, a teenager from down the street, had a sprained ankle. And Mr. Chen, a retired engineer in his 70s, had broken his wrist. The emergency rooms were filling up, and Meadowbrook Estates was contributing more than its share of victims. I made a decision. That night, under cover of darkness, I went into my garage, pulled out the bag of real rock salt, and spread it liberally across my driveway and the sidewalk in front of my house. The difference was immediate and dramatic. Within an hour, the ice was melting, leaving wet but navigable pavement. I knew I was violating HOA rules. I did not care. The next morning, I found a notice taped to my front door. The paper was printed on the official Meadowbrook Estates HOA letterhead, and the message was brief and threatening. Violation notice. Unauthorized de-icing agent observed on property at 847 Maple Ridge Drive. This constitutes a violation of HOA Environmental Protection Ordinance 23A. Fine of $250 assessed. Payment due within 30 days. Further violations will result in escalating penalties and potential legal action. Patricia Hendricks, HOA President. I stood there reading it, anger building in my chest. Mrs. Patterson was in the hospital with a broken hip because of this idiotic rule, and Patricia was worried about enforcing her ban on salt. My phone rang. It was Tom. "Did you get one too?" he asked, just now. "You?" "Yep, so did at least 8 other households." Patricia must have been out doing inspections at dawn. Tom's voice was tight with controlled fury. "This is beyond absurd. I have already called Mrs. Patterson's son. He is very interested in discussing legal options." "What kind of options?" I asked. "A lawsuit against the HOA for negligence. Creating unsafe conditions that directly resulted in injury, and I am going to help him do it pro bono." Tom paused. "I am also going to recommend we get a class action going. Anyone injured because of this policy should be part of it." "Count me in," I said immediately. Whatever you need. Good. Because we are going to need witnesses, documentation, everything. This is not just about the money. This is about forcing the HOA to revoke this dangerous policy before someone dies. The words hung in the air. Before someone dies. It seemed melodramatic, but it was true. A broken hip could be fatal for someone Mrs. Patterson's age. Complications, infections, blood clots. The mortality rate for elderly people with hip fractures was shockingly high. Over the next week, Tom went into full attorney mode. He organized meetings, gathered evidence, and started building the case. Mrs. Patterson's son, Robert, was fully on board. His mother was facing months of recovery and rehabilitation, and he was furious that it could have been prevented with something as simple as salt. We met in Tom's living room on a Saturday afternoon. The group included Robert Patterson, myself, the parents of the Schneider kid, Mr. Chen with his wrist in a cast, and half a dozen other residents who had either been injured or had close calls. "Here is where we stand," Tom said, laying out documents on his coffee table. The HOA's rule banning traditional salt and requiring inferior alternatives created a dangerous condition. That condition directly caused multiple injuries. Under Illinois law, homeowner associations can be held liable for negligent policies that endanger residents. But they will argue they were trying to protect the environment, someone said. And we will argue that safety takes precedence over aesthetics and environmental concerns, especially when those concerns do not outweigh the serious risk of injury. Tom picked up a thick folder. "I have been doing research. There are precedents. HOAs have been successfully sued for similar overreach. There was a case in Michigan where an HOA banned snow removal from common areas to save money, and someone died. The HOA was found liable for wrongful death." Mr. Chen leaned forward. "What are our chances?" "Good. Very good. Especially with multiple plaintiffs showing a pattern of injuries. No jury is going to side with an HOA that prioritized landscaping over elderly residents breaking bones." Tom looked around the room. "But I need to be clear about something. This will get ugly. Patricia Hendricks is not going to back down quietly. The HOA will hire lawyers and they will try to drag this out. Some of you might face retaliation in the form of harassment or additional fines." "Let them try," Robert Patterson said. His face was hard. "My mother is 78 years old, and she is terrified she will never walk properly again. All because of Patricia's ego and some misguided environmental crusade. I want the HOA held accountable." There was a murmur of agreement around the room. "All right then," Tom said. "We file next week." The news that multiple residents were suing the HOA spread through Meadowbrook Estates like wildfire. The subdivision divided into camps almost immediately. There were those who supported the lawsuit, fed up with Patricia's increasingly authoritarian leadership. And there were those who stood by the HOA, arguing that rules existed for a reason, and that the plaintiffs were just looking for a payout. Patricia herself went on the offensive. She sent out a mass email to all residents, painting the lawsuit as a frivolous money grab by people who had been careless on their own property. She claimed the HOA had acted in the best interests of the community, and that the approved ice melt products were perfectly adequate when used correctly. The email made my blood boil. I drafted a response and sent it to the community mailing list. "Patricia Hendricks claims the approved products are adequate. Tell that to Mrs. Patterson, who will spend months in rehab. Tell that to the dozen other residents who have fallen and injured themselves in the past week. Safety is not negotiable, and no HOA has the right to implement policies that put lives at risk for the sake of landscaping and environmental virtue signaling." The response was immediate and divided. I got supportive emails from at least 30 residents. I also got hate mail from Patricia's supporters, calling me a troublemaker and suggesting I move if I did not like the rules. One email, though, caught my attention. It was from a resident named Jennifer Bradford, and it was more cautious than supportive or critical. Mr. Yates, I appreciate what you are trying to do, but I think you should know that Patricia has been talking about taking additional action against the residents who used unauthorized salt. She mentioned in the last board meeting that she wants to pursue legal action for property damage caused by salt runoff. I thought you should be warned. Jennifer Bradford. I called Tom immediately. She is bluffing, he said after I read him the email. Or at least, she is making a huge mistake if she is serious. Going after residents right now when we have a lawsuit pending would be terrible optics and could be construed as retaliation. It would only strengthen our case. Should I be worried? I asked. Not legally, but watch your back. Patricia strikes me as the vindictive type. Tom was right about that. Over the next few days, I noticed Patricia driving slowly past my house multiple times. She would stop, take photos with her phone, and drive on. It was unnerving and clearly intended to intimidate. I was not the only one. Other plaintiffs reported similar behavior. Mr. Chen said Patricia had sent him a certified letter demanding he replace his mailbox because the color was allegedly not in compliance with HOA standards, despite the mailbox having been there for 10 years without issue. The Schneiders got a violation notice for having their garbage cans visible from the street 15 minutes before the designated time. It was petty harassment, and it was backfiring. More residents were reaching out to Tom, wanting to join the lawsuit or at least provide witness statements. Patricia's behavior was turning her into a pariah in the community she supposedly led. The lawsuit was officially filed in Cook County Circuit Court 3 weeks after Mrs. Patterson's fall. The plaintiffs included Mrs. Patterson, Mr. Chen, the Schneiders on behalf of their son, and 2 other residents who had suffered injuries. Tom had structured it as a negligence claim with a request for both compensatory and punitive damages. The HOA's response came quickly. They hired a firm out of downtown Chicago, expensive attorneys who specialized in defending corporate entities and associations. Their answer to the complaint was aggressive, denying all wrongdoing and arguing that the HOA had acted within its rights and that any injuries were the result of the plaintiff's own negligence. Reading the response made me furious. They were actually trying to blame Mrs. Patterson for breaking her hip, suggesting she should have taken more care or waited for conditions to improve before going outside. This is victim blaming at its worst, I told Tom. It is also standard defense strategy, he replied. They are going to argue contributory negligence, that the plaintiffs share responsibility for their injuries. But that argument falls apart when you look at the totality of the circumstances. The HOA created the dangerous condition. Individual caution cannot overcome institutionally mandated unsafe policies. The case moved forward through the grinding machinery of the legal system. Discovery began, which meant both sides exchanged documents and evidence. Tom subpoenaed HOA records, including minutes from board meetings where the salt ban had been discussed and approved. What those records revealed was damning. During the September board meeting where the salt ban was voted on, multiple board members had raised safety concerns. The vice president, a reasonable man named Stephen Foster, had specifically asked what would happen during severe ice storms when the approved alternatives might not be sufficient. Patricia's response, recorded in the minutes, was chilling in its dismissiveness. Our priority is maintaining property values and environmental standards. Residents need to exercise personal responsibility and caution during inclement weather. We cannot compromise our principles every time someone might slip. There it was, in black and white. Patricia had been explicitly warned about the safety risks, and she had prioritized aesthetics and ideology over protecting residents. Tom was jubilant when he found that passage. This is smoking gun material. It shows the HOA had actual knowledge of the danger and proceeded anyway. That goes beyond simple negligence. That is reckless disregard for safety. The HOA's attorneys must have realized how bad it looked too, because shortly after that discovery, we got our first settlement offer. It was insulting. They offered to pay Mrs. Patterson's medical bills and drop all fines related to salt use, but nothing more. No admission of wrongdoing, no policy changes, no damages. Robert Patterson rejected it immediately. My mother deserves more than just her medical bills covered. She deserves justice. Tom agreed. We are not settling unless they agree to revoke the policy permanently and pay actual damages that reflect the harm caused. This is not just about money. This is about making sure this never happens again. As winter dragged on, the division in Meadowbrook Estates deepened. There were residents who would not speak to each other anymore. The community Facebook page became a battlefield of arguments about the lawsuit, property rights, and HOA authority. Patricia remained defiant. She gave an interview to the local Oak Ridge newspaper, portraying herself as a beleaguered volunteer trying to maintain community standards in the face of selfish residents who only cared about convenience. I founded this board to protect our home values and our environment, she told the reporter. It is unfortunate that some people were injured, but personal responsibility matters. We provided approved alternatives. If people chose not to use them properly, that is not the HOA's fault. The article was a public relations disaster for her. The comments section exploded with criticism, and several residents who had been on the fence about the lawsuit decided to provide witness statements supporting the plaintiffs. One of those witnesses was Stephen Foster, the vice president who had raised concerns during the board meeting. He came to see Tom and me one evening in March, looking troubled. I should have pushed back harder, he said. I knew the policy was dangerous, but Patricia was so insistent and I did not want the conflict. I am ashamed of that now. Tell me about the board dynamics, Tom said. How did Patricia get this policy passed? Stephen sighed. She controls everything. The board is supposed to be 5 people, but Patricia dominates every discussion. If you disagree with her, she makes your life miserable. She will find violations on your property. She will question every suggestion you make. She will talk over you in meetings. Most of the board just goes along to avoid the drama. Is she acting within her authority as president? I asked. Technically, yes. But she has pushed the boundaries of what the bylaws allow. She has made unilateral decisions that should have required board votes. She has spent HOA funds on her priorities without proper approval. I think if someone looked closely at the finances, they might find some irregularities. Tom and I exchanged glances. Are you saying there might be financial misconduct? Tom asked carefully. I am saying I do not know where all the money goes. Patricia controls the books, and when I have asked to review them, she tells me it is handled by the management company. But we do not use a management company for most things. Patricia does it herself. This was a new and concerning development. Tom made notes. Would you be willing to make a formal statement about this? Yes, Stephen said. I am done covering for her. Mrs. Patterson getting hurt was the last straw. I should have resigned from the board the moment that policy passed. I am resigning now, and I want to help however I can. Stephen's testimony and willingness to discuss potential financial irregularities added a new dimension to the case. Tom started digging into HOA finances, requesting complete banking records and financial statements through the discovery process. The HOA's attorneys fought the request, claiming it was beyond the scope of the negligence lawsuit. But the judge disagreed, ruling that financial records showing how HOA funds were managed were relevant to establishing whether the board was acting in the community's best interests. When the records finally arrived, Tom spent a weekend going through them with a forensic accountant he had brought in. What they found was shocking. Over the past 2 years, Patricia had spent more than $40,000 of HOA funds on what she categorized as landscaping and beautification projects. But the receipts were vague, and many of them appeared to be personal purchases. There were charges from high-end garden centers, furniture stores, and even a company that installed custom water features. The water feature company was particularly interesting. According to the receipt, the HOA had paid $12,000 for an elaborate fountain installation. But there was no fountain in any of the common areas of Meadowbrook Estates. Tom drove around the entire subdivision to confirm. However, when I drove past Patricia's house at Tom's request, I saw a beautiful custom fountain in her front yard. "She has been embezzling," Tom said when I reported back. "This is no longer just a negligence case. This is fraud." The discovery of potential financial crimes changed everything. Tom filed an amended complaint, adding claims of breach of fiduciary duty and misappropriation of funds. He also did something else. He contacted the Illinois Attorney General's office. HOAs are governed by state law, Tom explained. If there is evidence of systemic fraud and mismanagement, the AG's office can investigate and potentially bring charges. This is bigger than just our lawsuit now. The Attorney General's office took the information seriously. Within 2 weeks, investigators arrived in Oak Ridge and began their own examination of the HOA's records. They interviewed board members, current and former. They reviewed bank statements and receipts, and they started building a case. Patricia must have realized the walls were closing in because she did something desperate. She called an emergency HOA meeting and attempted to get the board to vote to settle the lawsuit for whatever amount necessary, just to make it go away. But Stephen Foster was no longer on the board, and his resignation had triggered a special election. The residents, angry about the salt ban and increasingly aware of the financial issues, had elected reform candidates. The new board members were not loyal to Patricia. At that emergency meeting, which I attended along with about 50 other residents, Patricia faced a rebellion. "The board moves to table the settlement discussion," one of the new members said, "and instead moves to suspend President Hendricks pending the outcome of the Attorney General's investigation." Patricia looked like she had been slapped. "You cannot do that. I am the president." "We can and we are," another board member said. "Madam President, you are suspended from your duties effective immediately. You will surrender all HOA records, accounts, and passwords to the board within 24 hours. The room erupted in applause. Patricia stood at the front, face red, hands shaking. "This is a coup. You are all going to regret this. I will sue every single one of you." "Get in line," someone shouted from the back, and there was laughter. Patricia stormed out. It was the last time she attended an HOA meeting. With Patricia suspended, the new board took swift action. They immediately repealed the salt ban, issuing a formal apology to residents and acknowledging that the policy had been dangerous and misguided. They also announced full cooperation with both the lawsuit and the Attorney General's investigation. The lawsuit moved toward trial, but with Patricia's suspension and the board's admission that the policy had been flawed, the HOA's attorneys pushed hard for settlement. They knew they were going to lose, and they knew that a jury verdict could be devastating. The settlement negotiations took place in April. Tom represented all the plaintiffs, and the HOA brought in a mediator to try to reach an agreement. The final settlement was substantial. Mrs. Patterson received $200,000 for her medical expenses, pain and suffering, and ongoing care needs. Mr. Chen and the other injured plaintiffs received amounts ranging from $50,000 to $75,000 each. The HOA also agreed to pay all attorneys' fees and to maintain $1 million in additional liability insurance going forward. More importantly, the settlement included non-monetary terms. The salt ban was formally repealed and could not be reinstated. The HOA agreed to implement new oversight procedures for board decisions affecting safety. And Patricia Hendricks was permanently barred from serving on the HOA board or holding any leadership position in Meadowbrook Estates. Robert Patterson called me the day the settlement was finalized. "Thank you," he said. "Thank you for standing up when it mattered. Mom is doing better. She is walking with a walker now, and the doctors think she will make a full recovery eventually. This money will pay for the care she needs." "How does she feel about everything?" I asked, relieved, vindicated, and angry that it took a lawsuit to make the HOA act reasonably, but mostly relieved. The Attorney General's investigation concluded a month later. Patricia Hendricks was charged with 3 counts of theft and 1 count of official misconduct. The evidence showed she had systematically diverted HOA funds for personal use over a 2-year period, totaling more than $50,000. The criminal case moved through the system faster than the civil lawsuit had. Patricia's attorney tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the prosecutor was not sympathetic. Theft from a homeowner association, particularly when combined with official misconduct, was treated seriously. In September, almost 9 months after Mrs. Patterson's fall, Patricia Hendricks stood before a judge in the Cook County Courthouse. She pleaded guilty to amended charges in exchange for a sentence recommendation. The judge was a stern woman in her 60s who clearly did not appreciate people who abused positions of trust. "Mrs. Hendricks, you were elected to serve your community, to manage its resources responsibly and make decisions in the best interests of all residents. Instead, you treated the HOA as your personal bank account and imposed dangerous policies that resulted in multiple people being injured. Your conduct was selfish, reckless, and frankly, appalling." Patricia stood silently, eyes downcast. "I am sentencing you to 18 months in county jail, followed by 3 years of supervised probation. You will also pay full restitution to the Meadowbrook Estates, HOA, in the amount of $53,000, and you are prohibited from serving on any homeowner association board in Illinois for the rest of your life." Watching Patricia being led away in handcuffs was surreal. This woman who had once wielded so much petty power, who had made people's lives miserable over mailbox colors and lawn heights, was now facing the consequences of her actions. Tom and I walked out of the courthouse together into the warm September afternoon. "Think this changes anything?" I asked. "I mean, beyond Meadowbrook Estates, are other HOAs paying attention?" Tom shrugged. "Some will, some would not. There will always be people who think they know better than everyone else, who think the rules apply to everyone but them. But maybe this sends a message. Actions have consequences. Abuse your authority and you will pay for it." We stopped for coffee on the way back to Oak Ridge. The conversation drifted to other things, normal things. Tom's daughter was starting college. I was thinking about finally taking that trip to Montana I had been planning with Sarah before she got sick. "You ever think about dating again?" Tom asked suddenly. The question caught me off guard. I do not know. Maybe someday. Sarah was my person, you know. Hard to imagine replacing that. Not replacing, just finding something new, different but still good. Tom smiled. Linda has a friend she thinks you should meet. No pressure, just coffee. Let me think about it, I said, but I was smiling too. Meadowbrook Estates settled into a new normal over the following months. The reformed board implemented reasonable policies with actual input from residents. They held regular town halls. They hired a professional management company to handle finances, with full transparency and quarterly reports. The salt ban became a cautionary tale, mentioned whenever someone suggested a new rule that might prioritize aesthetics over practicality. "Let us not pull a Patricia Hendricks" became a common refrain. Mrs. Patterson made a full recovery, though she walked with a slight limp now. She still lived in her house and remained active in the community. In an ironic twist, residents elected her to the HOA board in the following election. She brought a perspective that was sorely needed. Someone who had been harmed by careless leadership and who was determined to make sure it never happened again. Winter came around again, and this time, everyone was prepared. Salt was stockpiled in garages. Driveways were treated properly at the first sign of ice. And when the first big storm of the season arrived in December, Meadowbrook Estates handled it without a single injury. I stood in my driveway that morning, spreading rock salt and watching it work its simple magic. My breath fogged in the cold air, and my fingers were numb despite my gloves, but I felt content. The subdivision was peaceful, blanketed in white. Neighbors were out helping each other, clearing driveways for elderly residents, making sure everyone was safe. This was what a community was supposed to be. People looking out for each other, not being controlled by someone on a power trip. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Jennifer Bradford, the woman who had warned me about Patricia's retaliation plans a year ago. We had become friends through all of this, bonding over the shared craziness. Coffee later. Want to hear about the board meeting? You will not believe what Mrs. Patterson suggested. I texted back a yes and finished salting my driveway. Then I helped Mr. Chen with his, and after that Mrs. Patterson's. By the time I was done, I was cold and tired, but in a good way. That evening, over coffee at the local shop in downtown Oakridge, Jennifer filled me in. Mrs. Patterson had proposed that the HOA create a community emergency fund, money set aside specifically to help residents who faced unexpected hardships. Medical emergencies, house fires, job losses, things that could devastate a family. She said we are a community, and communities take care of their own, Jennifer said. The board approved it unanimously. They are starting with $10,000 and will add to it each year from dues. That is really something, I said. From tragedy to triumph, from a broken hip to a fund that would help others, Mrs. Patterson had turned her pain into something constructive. How are you doing? Jennifer asked. Really, it has been a crazy year. I am okay, I said, and I meant it. Better than okay, actually. This whole thing reminded me that you have to stand up sometimes. You cannot just let people walk all over you or make dangerous decisions without pushing back. Sarah always said I was too accommodating. I think she would have been proud that I fought this. Jennifer smiled. I think she would have been. We talked for another hour about nothing important and everything important. The conversation flowed easily, and I realized Tom had been right. Finding something new and different could still be good. When I got home that night, I found an envelope in my mailbox. It was from the HOA, and for a moment, old anxiety spiked. But when I opened it, I found a thank you card. Mr. Yates, on behalf of the Meadowbrook Estates HOA board, we want to thank you for your courage in standing up for safety and accountability. Your willingness to challenge an unjust policy, even at personal cost, helped create positive change in our community. We are grateful for residents like you. Sincerely, the board. I set the card on my kitchen counter and looked around my house. It was quiet but not empty. Not anymore. Sarah's pictures were still on the walls, her presence still felt in every room. But there was space for new things too. New friendships, new possibilities, new chapters. Outside, snow began to fall again, light and gentle this time. I knew my driveway would need salt in the morning. And I knew I could use it without fear of fines or harassment. That simple freedom, the ability to keep my property safe without interference, was something I would never take for granted again. The Patricia Hendricks saga had ended not with a dramatic confrontation but with a whimper. She served her jail time quietly and moved away from Oak Ridge after her release. Last I heard, she was living in a condo in Arizona, far from homeowner associations and leadership positions she could abuse. Meadowbrook Estates thrived without her. Property values actually increased once word got out that the community had cleaned house and implemented real reforms. People wanted to live in a place where the HOA served residents rather than ruling them. Tom remained my closest friend and occasional legal advisor. His daughter loved college. His wife Linda did eventually introduce me to her friend, and we went on a few dates. It did not turn into a great romance, but it was nice. A reminder that life continued, that there were still good people and good moments ahead. Mr. Chen fully recovered from his broken wrist and started teaching Tai Chi classes in the community center. The Schneider kid's ankle healed, and he went on to play soccer in college. Small injuries with good outcomes, though they could have been prevented entirely with common sense policy. As spring arrived and melted the last of the winter ice, I found myself thinking about what the whole experience had taught me. HOAs were not inherently evil, but they required vigilance. Power concentrated in the wrong hands, even small power over mailboxes and driveways, could become tyrannical. People needed to stay involved, ask questions, and push back when leadership overstepped. The lawsuit had been necessary, but it was also a failure in some ways. It meant other solutions had not worked. Communication had broken down. Reasonable people had been unable to prevent an unreasonable policy from causing harm, but we had learned from it. The new board held open meetings. They solicited feedback before implementing new rules. They treated residents as partners rather than subjects. And perhaps most importantly, they prioritized safety over aesthetics, people over landscaping. One Saturday in May, the HOA organized a community barbecue in the common area near the subdivision entrance. It was the first major community event since everything had happened, and the turnout was impressive. Mrs. Patterson was there, moving slowly but steadily without her walker now. Stephen Foster came with his family, no longer burdened by the guilt of having enabled Patricia's bad decisions. Tom and Linda brought enough food to feed half the neighborhood. I stood near the grill, helping cook burgers and hot dogs, and watched people mingle and laugh. Kids played soccer on the grass. Elderly residents sat in lawn chairs, chatting and enjoying the warm sunshine. It felt normal and good and whole. Quite a difference from last year, a voice said beside me. I turned to see Robert Patterson, Mrs. Patterson's son. He had driven down from Wisconsin for the event. Night and day, I agreed. How is your mom really doing? Strong as ever physically. Mentally too, I think. She tells everyone she is fine, and I believe her. Robert paused. Thank you for being there that day, for calling 911 and staying with her. It mattered. Anyone would have done the same, maybe, but you also did what came next. You fought when a lot of people would have just accepted it and moved on. That matters too. We stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the community that had been broken and was now healing. "You think it will last?" Robert asked. "The reforms, the good leadership?" "I do not know," I said honestly. "People forget. New board members will come in. Maybe in 5 or 10 years, someone like Patricia will try to take control again. But I think enough people remember now. Enough people learned that you have to stay involved and speak up. That is the best defense against tyranny, even the petty kind." The barbecue continued into the evening. As the sun set and people started heading home, I helped clean up, gathering trash and folding tables. The new board president, a retired teacher named Dorothy Mills, came over to thank the volunteers. "This was exactly what we needed," she said. "Community, connection, remembering why we all chose to live here in the first place." It was a good day, I agreed. Walking home in the twilight, I passed Patricia's old house. A new family had moved in, young couple with a toddler. They were outside, playing in the yard, and they waved as I walked by. I waved back. The house looked better already, less rigid and austere. There were toys on the lawn and flowers planted without regard for perfect spacing. It looked like a home where people lived, rather than a showpiece to demonstrate superiority. My own house was dark when I arrived, but it did not feel lonely anymore. I turned on lights, made dinner, and settled in to watch a movie. Ordinary, comfortable, peaceful. The next morning, I got an email from Tom. The local news had picked up the Patricia Hendricks story and was doing a feature on HOA abuses. They wanted to interview some of the residents from Meadowbrook Estates. "Are you interested?" Tom's email asked. "Could be good to get the word out, prevent this from happening elsewhere." I thought about it and replied yes. If sharing our experience could help other people recognize warning signs in their own HOAs, it was worth the minor inconvenience of an interview. The interview happened 2 weeks later. The reporter was a sharp woman named Maria Rodriguez, who had covered local government corruption for years. She understood the dynamics of petty power and small-scale tyranny. "What people do not realize," she said as we talked off camera before the interview, "is that HOA board members often have more direct impact on residents' daily lives than elected officials. You interact with your HOA more than you interact with your city council or state legislature, and there is often less oversight." The interview itself was straightforward. She asked about the salt ban, the injuries, the lawsuit, and the ultimate resolution. I tried to be fair, acknowledging that HOAs served a legitimate purpose, but emphasizing the need for accountability and common sense. "What would you tell people who are facing similar situations with their HOAs?" Maria asked. "Document everything. Build alliances with your neighbors. Do not be afraid to push back when a policy is dangerous or unreasonable. And remember that board members are volunteers managing your collective property. They work for you, not the other way around." The segment aired a month later and got a lot of attention. I received emails from people all over Illinois and even other states, thanking me for speaking out and sharing their own HOA horror stories. Some were about salt bans, others about different issues. But the common thread was the same. People with a little power letting it go to their heads, imposing their personal preferences on entire communities. A few people even reached out asking for advice on how to fight back against their HOAs. I connected them with Tom, who was building a small side practice focused on HOA disputes. He was becoming something of an expert. "There is definitely a need," he told me over dinner one night. "So many people feel powerless against their HOAs. They do not realize they have options, that they can push back legally if the HOA is overstepping." "You are doing good work," I said. "We all are. You, me, Mrs. Patterson, everyone who stood up. That is how change happens. Not with one big dramatic moment, but with a bunch of people saying enough is enough. As the first anniversary of Mrs. Patterson's fall approached, the HOA board decided to do something I thought was brilliant. They declared January 15th Community Safety Day and made it an annual event focused on winter preparedness, emergency planning, and looking out for vulnerable neighbors. The inaugural Community Safety Day featured demonstrations on proper ice removal techniques, including the correct use of salt, sand, and other de-icing materials. There were first aid workshops. The local fire department came to talk about winter fire safety. And there was a neighborhood check-in program where volunteers would call or visit elderly and disabled residents during severe weather to make sure they had everything they needed. Mrs. Patterson herself gave a short speech at the event. A year ago, I fell on my driveway and broke my hip because our HOA had implemented a policy that prioritized landscaping over safety. It was a painful lesson, literally, but I am grateful that my injury led to positive change. I am grateful to the residents who stood up and demanded accountability. And I am hopeful that by making safety a priority going forward, we can prevent anyone else from going through what I experienced. There was not a dry eye in the room. After the event, I walked home with Jennifer. We had been dating casually for a few months now, taking things slow. She understood my grief over Sarah, and I appreciated her patience. That was really moving, she said. Mrs. Patterson is remarkable. She is. I do not know if I could be that gracious if I were in her position. I think you could. You are pretty remarkable yourself, Marcus Yates. I smiled at that. Maybe I was. Or maybe I had just been pushed into a situation where I had to stand up and I had surprised myself by actually doing it. We reached my house and Jennifer hesitated. Do you want company? Or do you need some alone time? Company would be good, I said. We went inside and I made coffee. We talked about everything and nothing the way comfortable people do, and at some point I realized I was happy. Actually, genuinely happy in a way I had not been since Sarah died. Life had moved forward. The grief was still there. It always would be, but it was not the defining feature of my existence anymore. I had fought a battle against an unjust rule and won. I had helped my community heal and reform. I had made new friends and maybe found the beginning of something more with Jennifer. The salt ban seemed like such a trivial thing in some ways. Salt on driveways. But it had been a catalyst for so much more. It had exposed corruption, revealed character, built friendships, and ultimately made Meadowbrook Estates a better place to live. Winter came again, and then another spring, and life continued its steady forward motion. Patricia Hendricks became a cautionary tale we told newcomers to the subdivision. The reformed HOA became a model that other communities studied. And I became someone who understood that small stands on small issues could matter just as much as grand gestures on big stages. 3 years after that ice storm, I married Jennifer in a small ceremony in our backyard. Mrs. Patterson attended, walking without any assistance now. Tom was my best man. The new HOA board sent flowers and a card congratulating us, and joking that at least we would not have to worry about wedding decorations violating community standards. Sarah's picture was on the mantel during the reception, and I knew she would have approved. She had always wanted me to be happy, to live fully, to stand up for what was right. I had done my best to honor those wishes. The subdivision continued to thrive. Property values remained strong. Neighbors looked out for each other. The HOA functioned as it was meant to, managing common areas and setting reasonable standards without overreaching into petty tyranny. Sometimes I would drive past the spot where Mrs. Patterson had fallen all those years ago, and I would remember that cold January morning. The fear, the anger, the determination to make things right. It felt like a lifetime ago and also like yesterday, but mostly I just lived my life. I went to work, came home to Jennifer, had dinners with Tom and Linda, checked in on Mrs. Patterson, and shoveled my driveway with proper salt whenever winter demanded it. The simple freedom to manage my own property safely, without fear of fines or harassment, remained something I cherished. Because I knew how quickly that freedom could be taken away by someone with a little power and a lot of ego. The HOA saga had taught me that vigilance was the price of peace, that community required participation, and that standing up to injustice, even small injustice, was always worth the effort. Those lessons stayed with me, shaping how I engaged with the world. And somewhere in Arizona, Patricia Hendricks lived with the consequences of her choices, a cautionary tale in human form about what happened when personal pride and environmental virtue signaling took precedence over common sense and human safety. As for Meadowbrook Estates, we were doing just fine. Better than fine, actually. We were a real community now, bonded by shared experience and committed to making sure the mistakes of the past never repeated. The lawsuit had arrived with the ice, just as the title of this story suggests. But what followed was not just legal victory. It was transformation, accountability, and ultimately healing. And that, I suppose, was the real story. Not just about salt and driveways and HOA overreach, but about what happens when ordinary people find the courage to say no to those who abuse power, even in small ways. About how communities can break and heal. About justice, sometimes delayed but ultimately delivered. Years later, sitting on my porch on a summer evening, Jennifer beside me and fireflies dancing in the yard, I sometimes thought about how different life could have been. If I had just accepted the salt ban, if I had kept my head down, if I had let Mrs. Patterson's injury pass without demanding accountability. But I had not. None of us had. And that made all the difference. The ice had come, and with it, a lawsuit. But also with it came change, growth, and a stronger community. Sometimes it took a crisis to reveal character and create opportunity for real reform. And sometimes, the most important battles were not fought over grand principles, but over simple things like the right to salt your driveway and keep yourself and your neighbors safe. That was the lesson of Meadowbrook Estates. That was what I carried with me. And that was why, even years later, I never regretted standing up to Patricia Hendricks and the HOA she had tried to rule. The fight had been worth it. Every moment of conflict, every hour of stress, every dollar spent on legal fees. Because in the end, we had won not just a lawsuit but our community back, and that was something worth celebrating. Today, tomorrow, and for all the winters to come.